several years ago, when the Common Core issue kind of came up, I had been involved in education issues for several years prior to that, and about 2004, I think, is when I first started getting involved, when my oldest was in school, and the school was no longer teaching the times tables or long division or division by fractions. And I'm an accountant, and by profession, I was deeply troubled by the idea that children would not learn their times tables and the rest of the basic math facts. And when I got involved, I won't share my entire story because that would take hours, but I was able to, with the help of a few other people that were very committed to the cause, get Utah to raise its math standards and do some other things. And when Common Core came out and I started to see what was going on, I became just overwhelmed. And I remember one morning kneeling down and praying and just saying, okay, God, if you want me to be involved with this fight, I can't do this by myself. This is like so big. There's got to be help. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, somebody emailed me a link to a video that a few moms in Heber City had done, 2 of them up here. No, it was Renee, okay. 2 of them. And so when I saw that video, I was like, I've got to get in touch with these people. This is awesome. Here's the answer to my prayers. And from there, it grew and grew, and there's been Allison over here and these 3 and some more here in attendance that have been very involved in these issues since the beginning. And what a great blessing it's been. I have so much love and respect for these people that have really sacrificed so much time and just been deeply involved. So what I wanted to do for this session is we came up with some questions. Mostly I wanted to get them on record, for some of these answers, and just talk a little about activism, being involved, what comes from it, and some things on local control maybe. And so we'll see how many questions we actually get through as we go through this little exercise, because everybody up here has stories to tell, and there's so much stuff that's happened. So some of these are going to be faster questions than others, right? Okay. Yeah, okay, so the beginning ones might be longer. All right, question number 1. I'll read the question, and then I'll let you guys talk, and then you can pass it back to me. The first question that I wanted to ask, and I would ask this of many of you as well, is what was the point in your life where you consciously said, I need to wake up out of my normal drifting life, drifting meaning non-proactive, non-involved, going with the flow, which all of us are typically part of?
I was living up in Heber, and a friend of mine said, are you going to the Common Core event that's at the local school board? And I said, I don't know what that is, but it sounds interesting. I didn't go, but then she later sent me a link to the YouTube where Lisa and Renee had spoken to our local school board, and I didn't know them. We lived 2 blocks away or something, but we'd never met. And when I watched that, I hit rewind, and I took notes, and I said, what in the world is this? What is going on? So then I started doing my own research, and when I figured out that Common Core was less about educational standards and it was actually about control, and when I figured out that we had given away our local control, we really had. Our state had given it away. I was horrified, and I was naive enough to believe that if we told enough people, they would be horrified too, and we would repeal it in a matter of days.
Well, the election was coming up.
Yes, it was shocking. The more we learned, the more horrified we became, and so I I like to write, so I started blogging and just putting all this research up there that we had found, and it didn't work. Common Core, it's been, 7 years? How long has it been? Common Core is here to stay. It's embedded in the data. It's not going away. And we lost our fight, but I like to believe that it was a fight that we were meant to fight. And we created a lot of awareness and raised a lot of questions. And those questions continue now as it snowballs into comprehensive sexuality national standards, science standards, all of this control of our educational system that started with Common Core, that the fight continues with wearing other masks. So I think I went over 2 minutes.
Well, I'm going to go pre-Common Core, and I was at my child's elementary school. This was when she was in 2nd grade, and it was Christmas time, and they were having a Christmas program, and it was awesome. I mean, it was just wonderful. Everybody was having a great old time, and all the kids were having fun, and all the teachers were having a blast. And but throughout the course of the program, I was thinking, there's not one mention of Christ. And I live amongst my neighborhood. Everybody around me in my life, believes in God, but yet we are not mentioning it. And so I had that little thought in my mind. And then the very closing number was the teachers coming out with Rudolph, reindeer things, and they were singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And it was all cute, but they just kind of were prancing around, and all the kids were smiling. And I literally had an out-of-body experience where I just sort of floated up out of my body, and I was looking down, and I saw these are the adults, and none of them are teaching truth. It's just fun and lively, and let's not think about what's really important about Christmas. And I just wanted out of there. I just thought, this is not, and I looked at my neighbors' faces. It was like really surreal, because they were all smiling and laughing, and I was standing there going, what are we doing? And so that was the moment when I just felt like I had to do something different. And then started learning about what was going on in my local school board, and it just blew up from there.
My name's Elisa Ellis, and how I first thought I got started began at a parent-teacher conference. And I walked in and was handed a brochure saying that the following school year we would be switching to this new set of national common standards. And I just couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that creeped up in me. And I started asking everybody I knew. There's a Facebook post that pops up in my memories all the time. Hey, have any of you ever thought of socialism being related to this new set of common standards? And everyone's like, oh, you just need to call someone and ask. But I just couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. And I spent 6 months asking and researching and trying to figure out where I could turn for answers. And a woman who's not here right now, but many of you know, Pamela Smith, came up to speak in Hebrew. And for the first time since the previous April, I had a place to dig. And it was 2 months after that we made too much. Sorry, this is so emotional because our lives changed because of these moments. But when it really changed, that's what I think, that was my original thought. But the following January, so a year later, I was sitting at my computer and my whole life had turned upside down from what it had been before. And we spent, I want to say, 20 hours a day researching and 4 hours a day sleeping and taking care of our kids in between there somehow. But I got an email from someone saying, hey, this man who's a liberty lover, Steve Pratt, passed away. And I had a moment where I saw in reverse my path that led me to this point in my life. Because 2 years prior to me walking into that parent-teacher conference, my cousin said, "Hey, Elisa, there's a man driving up from Cedar City to give a 6-week course on learning in liberty, and I want to invite you and your husband to come." And that is the moment that changed my life. And that's one person choosing to sacrifice their time to teach others principles. And it's emotional because one person can make a difference in other people's lives. And I want you to remember that, because our cause is not to win something. It is to stand for truth and to stand for principles of freedom and liberty. And as soon as we forget and think we're out to win something, we lose, because we have to testify of principles we believe in and let everything else fall how they may, because we put our trust in God first.
I was about 30 years old. I grew up in Pennsylvania and moved out here to go to school, and got married, stayed, and around 2000, I was 30 and realized that the faith I had grown up in, which is the LDS Church, believed that the Constitution was inspired of God, and I didn't know anything about it. Hadn't really learned anything about it in public school, and decided that, well, if it really came from God, I guess I should treat it more like Scripture and actually study it. And I got a book, which many of you are probably familiar with. I think there was a copy on the back table that Joyce brought in, The Making of America by Cleon Skousen, which is an amazing book. It takes the Constitution sentence by sentence and shares detailed quotes, not just little sound bites from the Founding Fathers, and the arguments that they used to craft the wording in that sentence. It's an amazing book. Highly recommend it. And that changed my life in terms of putting me on the road to learning what principles were and what amount of work went into freedom. And a few years later, Alpine School District, at a public meeting, my daughter brought home a flyer for, and it was called, this meeting was The Role of Public Education in a Democracy. And thankfully at that point I knew enough to know we're not a democracy, we're a republic, and there's a significant difference. And so I went to that meeting, and it was the first time I'd ever stood up in a meeting to say anything. And I got up in the public comment section and I said, it was Karl Marx that wanted free public education, and that was one of his 10 planks in the Communist Manifesto, which of course went over like a lead balloon. And I admonished them to use that book by Dr. Skousen, The Making of America, to teach the Constitution to our children. But they, that hasn't happened yet, I'll just say. So that started me down the path, though, and brought me, I guess, to here today. So, second question. And anybody can start this. I'll just pass the mic down. What triggered your involvement in education issues beyond just taking care of your own children's needs? Like, at what point did you say, okay, what was it that caused you to say, I can take care of my own children, but I can see that I need to go beyond that?
Well, because I got prayed into this little group, I really feel like the friendship and the emails that I was constantly receiving, and the research that we were constantly getting, not only from just our group, but people all over the nation. Really, there are people all over this country who are still very engaged in this. I feel like that was, it just continues, like it doesn't end. And we take breaks and we step back and do other things, but we have to continue, because even if we have our children in a good place, whether that's a school or homeschool or whatever it is, we know that there are many, many other people out there who don't have time or understand or have the interest. And don't their kids matter? We have to take a stand. I know, like right now, this comprehensive sexuality education or national sex standards, which are more about the sexualization of little children than teaching sex education to students. This is a big fight that's happening right now, and we're going to need a lot of people on board with that. Well, you might think that if you homeschool your child, if your child's in a wonderful environment, that doesn't affect you and you don't need to show up at the state capitol to be one of the testifiers there. But I would say that everyone here and 99 of their best friends need to show up, because other people have paid lobbyists that are showing up, and our side is just mostly just a bunch of moms and dads and grandmas and teachers who know what's going on and who care. So, long answer to the question. I want to always be involved, because the fight is never going to end.
So because you brought up comprehensive sexuality education, I have to just say something about that too. So I will answer that question. But I want to just let everybody know that I got home from a great little event last night with some awesome moms that I've just grown to love over this, 7 years. And we were just visiting about some different things that we're all learning and in this education battle, and about our own, personal principles. Well, then I went home and it was late, and I was trying to just clarify my presentation again, and I got this Facebook post, and it was one of the members of our legislature posting about being at the Utah Technology Council Gala. And their keynote speaker was the president, the CEO of Microsoft, and who's in charge of putting all these data systems in place. And the legislator in Utah that brought us our digital teaching and learning plan is now the head of the Utah Technology Council. They honored him last night. And then this legislator in the post said, and I think that we really should integrate technology into every subject. And I thought, oh my gosh. It's just continuing on, and it's continuing on because parents are allowing it. That's really what it comes down to. We have abdicated, like Crystal said. When we accepted Common Core, we said, have at it. Take over. We don't want to educate our own children. And I just really firmly believe that this is a reformation, a time of reformation, where parents, we have to care about everybody else's kids. Why? Because everybody else's kids are who our kids are going to marry. Everybody else's kids are who we're going to be surrounded by. And if they all think that our Christian beliefs are evil and that it shouldn't be tolerated, then we're up against a time in history where Christians really are going to be persecuted in America like we haven't yet experienced here. And I just think it's time that we continue the fight and gathering the one and doing everything we can to reach that next one person.
I don't know that I had a moment really of making a decision about whether or not this was something that I needed to reach out beyond my own home and speak out to others. It was more like Heavenly Father pushing me from behind, shoving me forward down a path to a different life that I never expected to take on. And I don't remember ever sitting there thinking, I wonder if I should do anything about it. It was like, go, 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 go. Don't sleep, just go. And that's kind of where I went. But there's a quote that I came across in my study by Ezra Taft Benson that is one of my founding principles. And I use it not just in educational topics, but almost every decision I make on how I vote, how I think. And he says, in a free and open society such as ours, a well-rounded education is an essential for the preservation of freedom against the chicanery, and I'm not very good at pronouncing some words. My English teacher, is that correct? And demagoguery of aspiring tyrants who would have us ignorantly vote ourselves into bondage. On the other hand, should the educational system ever fall into the hands of the in-power political faction or into the hands of an obscure but tightly knit group of professional social reformers, it could be used not to educate, but to indoctrinate. Is that happening? Yes, that's happening. But the thing that teaches me so much about this statement is he doesn't say if it ever falls into the other guy's hands. He doesn't quantify whose belief system. If it should ever fall into the in-power political faction, it doesn't matter whose views they are. We are not supposed to be a society based upon forcing our beliefs upon others. That's not how we're supposed to operate. And so I take that thought outside of education and I try to apply it to all decisions that I make. Is this idea of forcing my opinion on others, or am I allowing them the opportunity to think for themselves? Anyway.
So in terms of what triggered my involvement, I kind of shared a little about that, but I think just in a step order, as I tried to put it together in my own mind, first I had to understand what I believed. And so as I learned principles about the Constitution, that allowed me to have the framework to kind of go to the next step. And this will sound a little odd, but the next step is having opposition. As I've been involved in education issues, the only time I've ever seen people really get involved is when it affected them. Like for me, it was when my daughter was no longer being taught the times tables, and I was like, that's not right. You can't do that. Because not only is it affecting her, but tens of thousands of other kids are now going to go to college, and that's why UVSC back then, UVU now, had a 70% remedial math rate for freshmen that were coming in. Anyway, so the third thing would be we took care of our own children's needs. We supplemented math at home and did what we felt like we needed to. And fourth, I had the epiphany, as was mentioned over here, that, hey, someday my daughters are going to marry somebody and they could be from this area and they might not know how to multiply, and that's a problem. So that was kind of what got me reaching out beyond our family. All right, next question. These questions will go a little faster now, too. What have you done to overcome the fear of speaking up for what you believe in?
Oh, this is funny. Sometimes I would get invited to be on the radio and different things like that, and I would literally be shaking and like hyperventilating, and it was ridiculous. It was just completely ridiculous. It was just silly. I couldn't do worse. I could not have done worse. And in time, I think I just realized that, you know what, most of the people out there either aren't listening to the radio, or they don't really care, or if they do care, they don't know who I am, or they'll never meet me. If they do, they'll be afraid to tell me how badly I did. So I kind of put it into perspective, and I said, I guess I really don't care if I look stupid or not. You know, it's not about me. There are true important things to be said. Somebody has to say them, so why not somebody who can't really talk, you know? So I think the reality of how unimportant I am personally kind of hit me, and then it became easier to talk. So perfect love casteth out fear is another good one. If you know that what you're saying is true and it's important, and you love the people around you and the principles, then you're going to be able to speak.
I was just going to say the same thing, that it's not about you, and you just feel compelled. I don't really have anything more to add. I feel compelled.
We do occasionally fight over the microphone because we had so much to say, especially at the beginning. I don't know that fear was really ever part of the equation. It was more just feeling a divine guidance that I've never experienced in my life, that gives you, it was an empowering feeling to recognize that Heavenly Father trusted me with some knowledge and was asking me to do something, and it was empowering to recognize that I could be an instrument in what he was asking me to do. And so I don't know, but I mean, as you see, I turn red and I cry very easily. And I'm a very emotional person, and I did have a dream about a year before I started this, and I even spoke to our Relief Society president about it. I'm LDS, and because in this dream I was teaching a Relief Society lesson, and the class was engaged and laughing, and I wasn't red and I wasn't crying. And about a year into speaking around the state and across the country, and I realized that dream had never been about church, because I didn't realize that I was going to be on a different life path than I had planned on being the year before. But anyways, I wanted to add one thing to the last question that I forgot to add. But for me, the reason that I knew that I had to speak out is because I saw very clearly that this wasn't just a fight for control. It was a fight against the family. I could see the very beginning, the very foundation of the family was trying to be undermined, and our agency was being stripped away. And I knew that I had to speak out, because if we let things come into our education system and into the way we govern as they had been brought in through the Common Core path, that the very foundation of our American form of government was being stripped out from underneath us, and it was setting a new precedent. And so I had to say something about it.
So for me, it started off with, after that Republic Democracy School Board meeting, there's a lot more to it, but I created a survey to find out who in the district, among my friends at least, and people that I could email, what they thought of the math program. Because I was like, well, do other people think this is as stupid as I do? Or, and so I created a survey and gathered the results from, I think there were 54 people that took my survey. 80% of them hated the math. And I thought, I'm going to a school board meeting. The school board just doesn't know. They are just acting out of ignorance. I don't know who came up with this. They just randomly picked this program. Nobody knows how hated it is. And I thought I was going to genuinely inform them about something that they would want to be aware of. And I stood up and I said, I did this survey. Here's the results. There you go. We can solve this problem. And they said, thank you, Mr. Norton. Next. And I went, wait, so that's it? No action? And so I went home and I started a petition. It was my first petition. And that was what got me started. And then I kept going to these school board meetings. And I could tell that I was not wanted there. And it was a little uncomfortable and awkward at times. I saw one school board member actually fall asleep during my 3-minute, really lengthy, comment. But anyway, practice makes perfect, I guess. You start to overcome your fears a little bit. I still get nervous sometimes if I have to do something on the radio, because I know there's lots of people listening, and you don't want to say the wrong thing and then be quoted for it and all that. Although you get misquoted by the press anyway. So, all right, next question. These are a couple quickies here. Have you taken any unique educational paths with your children? Just public school, private, homeschool, or some hybrid? What have you done?
I've done all of the above. We've done all different things and had varying levels of success with everything. Probably the most unusual thing we did was last year I taught at Freedom Project Academy as an English teacher. It's kind of like a Skype high school where you have students all over the country, and it's a Judeo-Christian private school, and I loved teaching there. And one of my children took a supplemental math. While he was going to public school, he took a supplemental math through that same school. My other child took a first grade class there. It was just 2 hours a day and really loved it. But we're not doing that this year. So I think anything can work. as has been said here earlier, you have to go with your own instincts and talk to your spouse, your family, your children. Their opinion matters too, and you can find ways of working through and around the system that you find yourself in.
Yeah, so I kind of explained how we ended up at an American Heritage School, which is in American Fork. It's a private Christian school, mostly LDS, but they do have quite a few students that are not LDS. And what I love about it is the thing that I've learned is how much I missed out on classical literature growing up. To be able to read the books that I am with my kids, they have such a rich literature curriculum there. And so we've been there for about 7 years, and I'm now at the point where a little bit of me is starting to think maybe for my son I want to homeschool, because he's a lot more adventurous, and standardization of, we're going to learn this next and we're going to learn that next is not necessarily his favorite thing. And so I'm learning as I go that I want to make adjustments for each of my children as best as I can, and we might be homeschooling them next year.
Prior to that parent-teacher conference, I was very good at being a room mom and a field trip mom and doing all the typical public school mom things. And but since then, the more I studied and researched, I've done a lot of different things. I pulled my kids out of school and did strict homeschool, not strict, but I mean strictly homeschool. I'm not strict at all. I'm pretty laid back and not very, anyway. And a lot of people come to me with different ideas of things that work for them. I know what works and doesn't work for me to some degree, and I'm a very non-conformist type of personality, and so structure is not necessarily my best friend. But we do homeschool, and then the last 2 years we've done through My Tech High, but we're just doing all of our own thing. We aren't doing anything, and I've built a great relationship with the person that started that, and I think he has some great ideas and recognizes that parents are fundamentally have the right to direct their child's educational path. He's trying to help parents that are using the system. It's not the best path, but it works for some people. And I've really enjoyed that. But I also, we're dropouts at our home, and so I have some kids that are, I don't have a high school diploma. I'm a college graduate. I was public schooled, but I dropped out of high school and went to college at 17. My daughter did that. She's a junior at BYU. I have a senior right now who has never been homeschooled, but he will not graduate from high school. I highly encourage not getting a high school diploma, because within the system you can chart your own course and do whatever you want without having a diploma. And I think that if people knew that you could do that, that it's pretty liberating if you don't have the confidence to homeschool. My senior begged me as a 5th grader to homeschool him. And I said, "You are nuts. I would never, ever do that." And I kick myself now that I didn't take that opportunity, but it was something I'd never thought of doing and would have never even considered. But he did beg and plead as a 5th grader to pull him out. And it was a year before my eyes were opened as to what was going on. And by then it was too late for him to want to pull out. But.
So we've done several different things in our home, anything from supplementing to tutoring to, I mentioned earlier, I've got a daughter at Leadership Academy of Utah, and we love that. We've done charter schools, public schools. So as has been said, every one of our children have done something different, and usually in the same year, it seems like. So we've just tried to be as flexible as we could, and it works out. There's how many of you, I could just ask, how many of you feel like your K-12 experience was deficient in some way, or I'll just say, I can't say this on camera. So maybe you learned more as an adult than you ever learned in K-12 education. Okay, yeah. So that's why I mean, there's been times my wife and I have gone through the stressful wrangling of, what are we doing to our children? And then I realized, well, wait a minute, as soon as I graduated from high school and I actually, went and started to do things, I learned way more than I ever learned in high school. So it's not the end of the world if your child misses a year of school and does something different. Okay, I'm going to skip number 5 if you're keeping track of these and go to 6. What has been the effect on your family of your involvement in these issues?
Oh my goodness, do I have to tell the truth? Well, I have to say it's both. It's been both positive and negative. So I'll start with the negative so I can end on a good note. It was hard. It was really hard. There were many nights that I would be researching and writing so much that the next day I wasn't very cheerful. And there were many times when we would go and talk, out of town or out of state. And while my family was, proud of me and was learning a lot about principles of liberty along the way, it was also hard. I mean, who's doing the laundry when you're off, speaking somewhere? So I would say it is definitely sacrifice. If you get involved in the fight for liberty, it's not a free thing. It's not like I just do this during the commercials. It's a real sacrifice. And I think all the time about people like Elisa. Yeah, what commercials, right? People like Elisa who are serving on the state school board. I am so grateful for you and for the others who are with you, because that's a huge sacrifice. And I know that it takes its toll emotionally, mentally, and in terms of how much laundry gets done. It really does. And so it is hard. But on the positive side, I feel like we did what we felt we were supposed to be doing at that time. And that's what it really boils down to. If you have that thought that you should show up at the state capitol, you go. And if you have the thought that, you know what, you're going to have to pull your kids out of school that afternoon because no one's going to be there to pick them up for carpool, then you do it and you bring them with you to the state capitol and you have people look at you funny and who cares, It's very good and it's very bad, and you wish you didn't have to get involved. You wished I would love to learn how to quilt, There's things I would rather be doing with my time, but I guess I'll learn that in the next life because I don't see things slowing down. Honestly, I don't. So.
Yeah, what's that quote? Have I not yet done enough for my country? So I would just echo that. And then add to it that one thing that I've appreciated, even though my husband is definitely annoyed at times with how much I know and say and share, and it's definitely brought us to a place where we're talking about principles more often than we used to, and our gospel conversations are a lot more in depth when we do learn a gospel principle, or we hear about it in a church meeting or something. We're able to come home and talk about it in terms of the principles of liberty, and really, I guess, feel close. I mean, it does take its toll on the relationship and the family, but at the same time, it brings you closer together if you allow it to, because you're both seeking to be a benefit to your children in the end. So
I wrote down difficult, but blessings abound, for all the reasons that have already been stated. If you asked my husband this question, his answer would probably be very different from mine, because I see more of the positive in everything that's been happening, and the growth and knowledge that have happened in the moments where we've been able to show our children God's hand in things. There's just been too many moments in time that I cannot deny that He has had a hand in my journey and in my path. I can't deny it. And I try to take every opportunity that I can to share that with my children so that they can feel of that testimony from me. And my husband's been very supportive. I've been blessed with that, and there haven't been very many grumpy moments over the last 7 years about this issue. But if you asked him, he may talk about the difficult picking up the laundry, and the house is definitely in a different state of organization than it was prior to my involvement. Anyways, so.
Oh, how about your house? Is your house less?
I'm not going to answer that. My wife is a saint. So on this question, I actually emailed my wife and my children. I said, "What are 5 things that you've felt as the effects or the learned, positive or negative, from my involvement over all these years in activism?" My kids didn't respond, and I don't know if that's an indictment or what, but these were the things from my wife, and it was not what I expected. I'm just going to read them because this is what she said that she learned over the years. There's 5 points here. 1, she placed too much trust in our kids' teachers, wonderful though they were. 2, God and the parents are my children's experts. 3, I was a better homeschool mom when I wasn't trying to be one. The label got in the way. 4, it's better to make mistakes learning with faith rather than to have perfect success and a board of authorities to make sure no mistakes are made. And 5, the war in heaven is replayed in every way, every day, in every decision we make. We must teach our children to choose and not be acted upon. So that's our answer. All right, next question. Grab a pen and paper if you want to jot some of these down. This is your reading list, I guess. So the question is, what are 2 to 3 of the most influential non-scripture books or articles you've read that helped shape your life and basis and principles?
Okay, I limited myself to 6. So one of the best books I've read, it's such a simple book. It's called The Book of Mormon and the Constitution by H. Verlin Anderson. I'll say that again. The Book of Mormon and the Constitution by Verlin Anderson. 1984 by George Orwell. I recommend only reading the first half and then lose the book because you'll be depressed if you read the whole thing. Number 3, 100% Responsible. It was actually a devotional given last August by Lynn Robbins at BYU. 100% Responsible. It's amazing. And then those are my positive 3 that I allowed myself to share because I have a lot more than that. But my negative 3, which I think you learn as much from your enemies as you do from your friends, the Communist Manifesto, Agenda 21 by the United Nations, and all the other agendas of the United Nations, and Global Education for All, and the Global Monitoring Report from the United Nations. No, sorry, Global Education Monitoring Report of the United Nations. And I'll stop.
That's really funny that you should say that because I was realizing with this question how much I read those kind of things. And not whole books anymore. I need to get back to my book reading. But one of the most influential books that I read probably about 10 years ago was written by a liberal professor by the name of Alan Bloom, and it's called The Closing of the American Mind. Has anybody heard of that or read it? He kind of basically talks about being a college professor and seeing how his kids have changed, how the students coming into his classroom have changed over time. And he doesn't really make the connection so much about that it's a flaw in families, but he does make the connection that it's a lack of moral teaching. And so that was powerful for me because I just realized how much families had abdicated their responsibilities. Let's see. Atlas Shrugged, Anne Ryan is one of my favorites. And then when I really deeply thought about it, you won't need to write this down, but family histories of my grandparents have been very powerful for me. And when Allie was talking about how George Buchanan had such a powerful impact on her, I'm a 4th generation descendant of Orson Pratt, who came into this valley, or Salt Lake Valley, 3 days before Brigham Young, and helped plot the land. And he was self-educated. He was amazing. You read over his life story and the science and the math and the ingenuity, and I just am inspired by that type of self-learning.
I was like Jaquel, and I hadn't really even thought of all that type of reading that Crystal mentioned, because I've done a lot more of that reading. But when I went to sit down and talk about actual books, I was like, well, I'm going to put it, but I don't know that I actually ever sat down and read the entire thing, because there's just too much to read. So, but when I met this man, I was telling Neil Flinders earlier, I met this man ice skating, Don Norton, and he recommended a book to me called Educating Zion that he just helped compile, and it's, yes, right there, that book. And there's a lot of great, excellent quotes in there, and it's just a compilation of speeches at BYU by people, members of the LDS Church leadership or BYU presidents. I really love that. The Majesty of God's Law, I absolutely love. And if you look at the Count My Vote fight, and see how they're trying to undermine the principles that are in the Majesty of God's Law, and how our founders came up with our form of government and what they based it on, that is a very important one for me. My grandpa was good friends with Cleon Skousen, and so, a lot of them are his books that I've spent a lot of time reading, but it's not that I've even really read them all. It's sitting at my grandpa's knee and listening to him talk, although I didn't even care or listen to him, and so I'm amazed at how much I heard, because I really didn't listen to him. I love Revealed Educational Principles. I think that's a good one. I love God, Family, Country. There's a book, Yearning for the Living God, that is Elder Boucher, if I'm saying it correctly. And I just feel like that one really helped me focus on how to follow spiritual guidance.
So I already mentioned one of mine, which was The Making of America. Another one is called Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. That is such a good book. Anything by John Taylor Gatto. He is a wealth of information and just rock solid principles. And I'll just mention this one. This was the life-changing article, I guess, I read. It's actually from Ezra Taft Benson in a General Conference talk in 1965 called Not Commanded in All Things. And it lists off several of the lies the devil gets us to believe to neutralize us in doing anything. And just stripped me bare and ripped all my excuses away, and I realized I had to do something, and that got me started. So last question. This is number 9. If you're on there. If there was one idea that you would like to see implemented tomorrow to improve the education system, what would it be? Just one. That's it. 1 minute.
Okay, so I have a problem with the question because we really don't have the educational system, right? I mean, we have so many different ways of educating, so I really have a problem with the question. But my answer is reporting that is not ridiculous. That's what I would change. I would have education reporters at all the newspapers and television agencies that would actually report what's actually happening in the families and in the schools, report what's actually happening on the global level, interview Jaquel for a couple of hours and write down the things that are real, instead of what the newspapers, I think, do, because they're busy and they don't have enough reporters. They just read the press releases that whoever Bill Gates is funding that at that moment for his latest educational philanthropy is, they just read those press releases and rubber stamp it, and then everybody thinks that that's what's happening in ed reform. And it is not accurate, and it is not a complete picture, and it's very misleading. So if I could change something about our educational system, it would be the reporting of it, so that truth would be among the people. And right now it's not. Most people are completely in the dark. This is the minority that's sitting in this room that understand what's happening in education reform. Most people have no idea.
So I had a lady walk up to me while we were having a conversation, good friend. We're on camera, so I can't be more specific. But she's a teacher in school, and we'd known each other for very, very many years, someone I deeply admire, and said to me, when she found out we were private schooling, she said, well, parents shouldn't be allowed to private school because it brings the scores down at school, and then I'm a teacher, so then I get dinged for, and I'm dinged because you're not keeping your kids in school. The good families are pulling their kids out, or the parents that are involved are pulling their kids out. But it really shook me to my core, because I was like, okay, this is somebody I sit next to in Relief Society, and she's telling me that I shouldn't be allowed to private school. So if I go back to my deepest wish of what would actually happen, it would be that everybody would pull their kids out tomorrow just to make the point that these are our children. And I know it's not going to happen, but that's my deep desire, that there would be some kind of a revolution where we would all as parents join hands and say, this system's going down today, and we're reforming it.
Yes. As I stated, I love the book God, Family, Country. And that is the order that things need to be put in. And if I had my wish, God would be central in our education, because people completely misinterpret the separation of church and state. Family would be central in education. It's on the books. We've put it into statute that the family has the right, even though it's a God-given right, to direct their educational path of their children. But do we follow it? No. Do we believe it? No. We need to do it. And country has got to be central in our education. That was the purpose originally of finding of a good education, was so that children could have a knowledge of God, country, and it was in a family-centric unit.
So I spoke this morning on a couple of things that I'd like to see happen. So on this one, I think Joel Wright, who's sitting here, smiling now, who's on our state school board as well, I think we've had this conversation before. You might have even prompted this one into my mind. But there's a lot of teachers that will complain about this diversity of students they have in their classrooms. I teach 7 grade levels in my math class. It's impossible for me to try and teach everybody. And we need to take some kind of action to remove the stigma of having different ages in the same classroom, because everybody's genius at something. And if you've got a 10-year-old and a 17-year-old, and they're both working on algebra, that shouldn't stigmatize either one of them, because the 17-year-old's going to be better at something else, and it's just life, that we're all created different. And I think that when we give everybody agency to progress in the areas at a pace they're comfortable with, at a skill level they're comfortable with, God helps them to progress and find their genius so that they can move forward and do the things that He's trying to help them grow into. So with that, that's the end of our panel discussion. Thanks.